Before we get into today's show, I want to thank the people who help make the Healthcare Security Cast possible. I'm talking about our sponsors and collaborators. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank 3D Network Technology, Genetech, Change Execution Group, 360 Life Transformation, Canadian Security Magazine, and Omnigo Software.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, May the 10th. On today's episode, we'll be looking back at episode 64, which was previously unreleased. This was actually a live interview with Brad Stewart that was part of an event put on by IAHSS Communications. Just want to say a special thank you to Stacey and Amanda who invited us to participate in the event, and we look forward to the 2021 event as well. In this interview, we discuss leading in turbulent times, focusing primarily on the COVID-19 pandemic. And this interview actually took place back in November of 2020. I hope you enjoy. Brad Stewart is someone who I always enjoy having a conversation with. He has a great sense of humor, and that really shines through in this interview. Hope you enjoy, and we will jump right into the interview.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am very excited for this session. Two of my most favorite people in the healthcare vertical, Mr. Brian Hamilton and Mr. Brad Stewart. So, Brian, I will let you get started here.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for joining us today. As Amanda mentioned, I have the pleasure today of interviewing my good friend and respected healthcare security leader, Brad Stewart. How are you doing today, Brad?
I'm good. How's everybody else?
Well, we'll assume everybody's good. We'll have to watch the chat to see how the responses are to that question. All right, Brad, we'll jump right in. And the first question I'm going to ask, and you know what's coming for this one. And the first question I ask everybody, who is Brad Stewart?
First and foremost, I have to mention that I'm a husband to a lovely wife and two beautiful daughters. I'm the manager of security at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener. It's about 100 kilometers southwest of Toronto. It's a fairly large community hospital, about 665 beds. I'm also the IAHSS Ontario Chapter Secretary, which I've held since about 2012, and I just can't seem to shake that. It's a very good position because I'm able to keep the information flowing across Ontario.
Sounds good. And you do a great job of that. And just for the record, Brad, Martin says he's good. Now, the next question I want to ask you is, because you're in healthcare, obviously, what was it that drew you to healthcare? You know, I know prior to you had a few years of experience in security, but what drew you to the healthcare environment?
If I were to reflect back, I was in factory security, and it paid about $6 an hour. And I had an opportunity to become a contract supervisor at the Freeport site, which is it was at the time a chronic care facility with rehab. And it was a $2 bump in pay. And then once I got there and got to meet the patients and the clients, visitors, very busy location, I became fascinated with healthcare, especially with all the different nuances of it. And then eventually ended up doing cross-site with the acute site, which is a fairly large acute facility with all the mental health, addictions, emerge, all the really interesting stuff. And then I just ended up becoming the manager about 2008, and we've continued to build a fascinating, interesting regime. It's interesting in that you don't just get $3 million to fix things. You have to come up with creative ways of fixing the problems. That's about it.
Excellent. Now, obviously, you've been at the hospital for a number of years. You've been in healthcare security for 25 years, give or take. So during that time, you've had the opportunity to work through SARS, H1N1, Ebola, and now COVID-19. How did the past experience prepare you for what you're facing right now?
Each one was unique in its own right. SARS was viewed as predominantly a Toronto issue, kind of stuck around the Toronto hospitals. It was kind of interesting because public hospitals are not locked, and the ministry said, lock your doors, and everybody went, how? So you had to come up with unique ways to lock. You had to come up with ways to screen, and they couldn't decide whether we should be masked and wearing face shields or just masked. So trying to mobilize everybody to get ready for that took them several weeks to really get things going. The H1N1 was another interesting one because they started reflecting that we're about due for a pandemic that was going to wipe out half the world's population. So then that got you into the pandemic planning. So massive amounts of time planning and creating documentation and plans. Again, it's back to how do we lock the doors? Who's coming in what door? How are we going to keep the flow going? Do we allow visitors? So that kind of set the tone for what we're going through now. Ebola got us into PPE. So we were donning and doffing and making sure everybody had their PPE certifications and get ready because it's going to come, and getting ready for isolation rooms. And then when COVID came, they said lock the doors, and it was like, okay, no problem. And we locked her all down, try to get the screening going. We had to solicit extra security staff to man the doors because we were expecting crazy amounts of people to be all angry and swarming. And at one point, we even had police at our doors for a few days because we had to tell visitors they weren't coming anymore. I think everything prepared us for when it actually happened, but we weren't prepared for not knowing if we were going to have PPE.
Great. Now, what are some of the lessons learned that you've had since this current pandemic started?
Establishing contracts. This is an in-house operation, in-house security. We didn't have a contract with a contract security firm, which would have access to more individuals on a quick basis. So we were scrambling, and everybody was scrambling. And just establishing contracts before it happens is probably your best thing that you could have in your back pocket. The other piece is, they ask us for capital ideas every year, and we come up with this wish list that just sits on the list for years and years. It's getting those projects ready to go. I do not have a way of locking my external doors at one of my facilities. And we had to come up with ingenious ways on how to do it, like making spider webs out of caution tape, like it's just crazy. And then continuously checking the doors. But we had to scramble and pull together a document to go out so that we could lock the doors. So we're going to do magnetic locks, setting up your contractors with your vendors, making sure you have everything ready to go, establishing communications with your infection control team on what you can and can't do. One of the things that I'm sure all of us are facing is how do we train our security staff on their yearly defensive tactic training. A lot of hospitals aren't allowing it to be any contractors to come in. So establishing something offsite and then keeping within the 10 and remembering that 2 of your trainers is part of the 10. So it's been a bit of a challenge. And then be prepared for the unknowns and keep adapting, thinking outside the box.
Right. And you displayed some of that with the example there of, how you had to kind of improvise securing a facility that couldn't be secured externally.
I actually have one of my security officers that was on light duty that was going around checking all the caution tape every day and putting up new caution tape and then checking your cameras to see who's going through the caution tape, and then going to talk to those physicians about not going through caution tape. So it's been an interesting ride. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that we collectively have been paying a lot more attention to is just the added stress to the frontline staff. So one of the positives in these situations is that typically you're going to see stronger bonds form between your teammates because, they're dealing with a really difficult thing and working through it together. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced as far as your team is concerned, and how are they being supported, and how are they supporting each other?
They're definitely experiencing burnout. Our clients are coming in more acute and more violent. They're supporting each other. Well, first and foremost, a lot of these guys like to go to the gym, and a lot of them like extracurricular activities. They couldn't go to the gym. They couldn't watch sports. They couldn't play sports. There's a lot of outlets that they're not able to do. We saw gym sets go from $200 up to $3,000, and a lot of guys couldn't buy home gyms. So they've been sharing some equipment with each other. They've been improvising and creating new equipment. They've been helping each other work out. Some of them are talking to each other about, let's go running. And I've got a few that have taken up running as a new hobby that they really enjoy. We talk to each other, check in. You notice when somebody's not acting like they usually do, and you're able to start that communication like that's not how you would usually talk to a client, what's going on, and just being aware of each other's issues. There's no doubt there's been a lot of people affected by COVID-19. Their home life's affected. They're used to their downtime life, and it's just not happening. And a lot of security staff in healthcare are super paranoid, so they're always sanitizing and washing, and a lot of them are too scared to go out. So just trying to support each other as best as they can, communicating more on shift and off. But as far as the hospital goes, they have offered extra counseling and other resources. We've seen a lot of gifts from the community, as I'm sure a lot of other hospitals have. Lunches have been coming in, coffee cards have been coming in, some dinners, lots of neat little videos from the community. Our staff have created, as in the hospital staff, have created videos for the community as a thanks. So it's been very interesting.
Now, we've talked about this offline, but as a leader, there's still obviously you have that same stress yourself that you have to deal with. What are some of the things that you're doing just to take care of your mental health during this time? And I know we talked about this. We talked about some of the things our family members are doing to help during this time, but what is Brad Stewart doing?
Brad Stewart disappears to the cottage. Just staying busy with things around the house, projects that I haven't been keeping up on. Some days I go home, I don't even want to look at a screen. Our new world is what we're doing right here. We're looking at a screen, talking to each other. You don't get that live interaction. I've been doing this so much that I caught myself going home, sitting on the back deck and staring at a blade of grass for 20 minutes just to decompress from all the things that you're doing on a constant basis. You're called into meeting after meeting after meeting to discuss how we're going to cope with the next issue. And there's a constant next issue. It just doesn't stop. It could be we don't have enough PPE to certain individuals want to review the PPE. I'm also on the Joint Health and Safety Committee, so they want to review PPE, the new standards, ministry guidelines. We also run a COVID clinic drive-through, so that has presented its own issues and challenges. But I leave here and I actually haven't even been watching TV. I hear other people complain that there's not enough on Netflix, and there's lots for me because I haven't been watching it.
I can relate with some of those by applying some of those same practices. Now, from the standpoint of the organization, what are some of the ways that your team and your organization has had to adapt to the challenges related to the pandemic?
Well, this facility has relied on in-house security for a very long time. So soliciting help from contract security, which has been a huge bonus for us, and getting the organization or our teammates to embrace that we do need help. The COVID clinic, like I mentioned before, scrambling to open a COVID clinic and then trying to keep up with the numbers that we were seeing. We were hitting 800 a day without appointments, and a lot of those were coming from Toronto. They started lining up at 2 a.m. We had to solicit help from the police because they were blocking the streets and they were shoulder to shoulder walking in, and we actually had to shut down and collect our thoughts, and then we went to appointment only, and it's been a lot more controlled. But that constant adapt, like every day it's like, hey, we need 5 more security, we need 8 more security. It's like, I don't have that kind of numbers, and I can't just call somebody and say, hey, send me 8 more today. So you start looking at, should we have multiple contracts? Should we be hiring more in-house just as a reserve? And I know some hospitals were doing that just to make sure that they had enough for what was coming. And you have your ups and downs. So one day you're up a lot of intake through Emerge, and then the next day it's just nothing. And it's trying to plan for that. We used to joke back in the day that it was really busy because there was a full moon coming. Now it's not a full moon, it's just happening on a daily basis. And it's changing daily. People, especially now, everybody's back in school and life is kind of semi-normal, but now everybody's getting the sniffles because winter's coming and everybody has to get tested for COVID because, it could be COVID. It's a completely different time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember with my previous employer, I was working for a guard company, and the minute this happened, I had one client alone needed an extra 2,000 hours a week. So it was a huge shift, and then just trying to navigate that. And it again, I'm sure you're having the same challenges even with staffing. It's hard to find people who want to work directly in that environment.
Yeah, and that kind of changed the security industry in itself, because it was always, let's try to get the cheapest contract. Now it's just try to get a contract that's affordable, because all the prices had to go up. I had to say, you're going to have to charge me more to get people to come. And your in-house guys get a little ticked off because now the contract people are making almost as much or as much. And it's like, well, it's supply and demand. By the same token, who wants to come running towards a disease? It's not something anyone wants to do. And it takes a different breed to work in this type of environment where you're not sure what's coming around the corner and how bad it's going to get. And that's kind of the way we were in the beginning, because nobody really knew enough. And it was the same with SARS. Like, they thought it was, the sneeze will get you. No, it's the air you breathe will get you. So it's that unknown which caused everybody to wear masks, because it's not so much, especially inside the hospital, it's not so much to control because we're all sanitizing. It's to alleviate everyone's fear that, maybe she works in ICU. I don't know. So everybody's walking around with masks. And that was another challenge, is if you're not used to wearing a mask all day and you suddenly have headaches and you're not feeling well, and then you find out that it's dehydration, you need to drink more water. And it's those little nuances that you don't know until you talk to your clinical partners, right?
Exactly. Now, I want to kind of shift focus here and talk about technology. Have you been leveraging any new technology or leveraging any current technology in a different way since the start of the pandemic?
So organizationally, we're still not letting visitors in, but staff have to be screened at the entrances. And we realized that we really didn't have a tracking method for staff. So they installed an app that we could put right on our personal phones. And there was also Apple iPads at the entrances where you can log in. You have to punch in your name, you're symptom free, and you're coming to work. And that was kind of their guarantee and their due diligence that they're checking everyone. Since then, we've changed to we had to do a little course and sign off that we will not report to work if we don't feel well, and that we'll go for a COVID test. We are looking at technology for visiting because they're still using the paper sheets, and there's a much more technologically advanced way of doing that. They just got to figure out how they want to implement it. But we have been adding more access control, more CCTV. As you can guess, at the beginning, back in March, people became so paranoid that they were actually taking off with cases of PPE out the door and just taking off with it. So then we had to secure it in certain locations and put cameras on it and access control so that we know where everything was going. And we're one of the few locations in the province that is running a regional warehouse as well. So we have PPE in a 40,000 square foot warehouse offsite.
Wow. Now, one of the things that you touched on, and it's consistent with a lot of conversations I've had, is with employee screening. Now, you didn't quite touch on it in the way that I'm going to ask you about here, but speaking with other healthcare security leaders, one of the things that they said was most surprising is some of the staff reactions, especially early on, to having to be screened and, being told, today, I know yesterday this way you could come in this door, but today you can't, you have to go to another door. Have you had any challenges with staff complying with the changes as they've come up?
Yeah, one of the largest challenges was when you come for screening, you have to don a mask, and some of them were refusing because they didn't feel the need to do it until they got to their department. And we had to utilize CCTV to track these people down and talk with them, with their manager, and sometimes with HR. And some of them, surprisingly, were very anti-mask, and I couldn't believe it because of the environment that we were in. And it was people that we didn't even think could act like that. So it definitely has changed the way people think. I think some of it's burnout from having to be cautious at all times, and the fact that you don't have extracurricular activities to kind of vent your frustrations out on, like boxing. Muay Thai. I've got lots of guys that are into Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They can't do that right now. They're all paranoid of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And understandably so. Now, one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier was becoming dehydrated, wearing masks, and just, I'm just thinking of that as something that you weren't expecting going into this.
No.
What are some of the challenges that you didn't expect that came with COVID-19?
Recruiting, for one. Being an in-house facility, we pay a lot more than a lot of contract firms. And we just could not find people, and we still struggle to find people who want to work in this environment and who would be a good fit for this environment. The other thing I wasn't expecting was the lack of community sports for some of our clients, and the fact that now we've got large volumes of acute clients who are sicker than I've ever seen them in my career. They're coming in more violent, more usage of illicit drugs, and very hard to control, to the point that I had 6 security staff off on injury. And wow. It was 1/3 of my staff complement. And then I've got guys that they're actually limbering up before they go to a call. They've got stretch bands to make sure they don't get injured, because it is a lot of hands-on, including the police. we do a handoff from the police, and there's higher volumes coming in. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. And I have a couple more questions for Brad, but for everybody who's watching, if you have any questions, just feel free to enter them in the chat. I'll be watching. But as we wait for those questions to come in, the next thing I want to ask you about is just planning for the next steps. Looking ahead, and not too far ahead, but looking ahead, we have winter quickly approaching. What do you foresee as some of the challenges that are going to impact your team's activity? And how is it going to impact the routine duties in your estimation?
I can see that we're going to have more community issues. I've already started talks with our regional partners about homelessness and disadvantaged. A lot of in this area, we do have some tent cities, and there were some summer setups. Now we're heading into winter, and there's winter shelters, but they hadn't been identified yet. There hadn't been soup kitchens identified because nobody was running them. We're heading into a harsh winter, and we've already seen a higher activity of homeless individuals trying to get in by trying all our doors and trying to push past screeners. And we've already got all those community support information to our security officers to make sure that they're able to talk to these individuals when they're looking for help, because nobody wants to sign in and wait for 3 hours to talk to a social worker to find out where they could sleep tonight. So, just trying to head off some of those issues before they even start. And then setting up some solid contracts in case we get into a heavy wave coming up. We've seen Winnipeg is overrun right now, and that could be us soon.
Now, I want to circle back to something you mentioned way earlier on, and that's IAHSS. Now, you made reference to being the chapter secretary for the last 8 years now, and not being able to shake that role. What has IAHSS meant to you, and how have you used the resources, your network during this time?
Well, I'm lucky in that I have the email list.
This definitely helps.
So when I have a question, it goes out immediately. But anybody else who has questions, they shoot me. Any of the ones that know me will shoot me a message, and I'll usually respond that day with the answer. If I don't have the answer, then it goes out to the greater community. But so far, pretty much everybody knows that I'm the guy to email, and they always get that message out. But definitely, one of the early on, IAHSS did send out a little guideline about off-site facilities setting up. I think everybody went through the exercise of looking for a field hospital. We visited several local hotels, motels, arenas, thinking that we were going to have to set up field hospitals for 600, 800, we didn't know how many people, and special rooms for ventilators and isolation and getting polytarp. And I know in some communities, those facilities got set up and are still set up to this day. We're just waiting for the droves of people that might come.
Excellent. And I guess the last thing I will ask, because there's no questions in yet, but if anybody does have questions for you, what is the best way to get a hold of you? I know you're a very, very accessible guy. I use LinkedIn a lot, but you're not as quick to respond on there. But what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and my email address is brad.stewart, STEWART, at grhosp.on.ca.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brad. I appreciate you taking the time to do this and share your knowledge with us. And I'll turn it back over to Amanda.
Sure. And Brad, one question that came out of the previous session that I thought was nice. What type of, advice And what do you think security managers need to know going into 2021?
A ton. Just staying in touch with their infection control, establishing yourself in leadership conversations. I'm in a weekly leadership conversation, which is all hospital leadership, and I'm also part of the clinical team. So that's something that I've built over the years, as well as our community supports, Waterloo Regional Police, EMS, a lot of our community partners with social services. Yeah, there's too much to, that question is way too big, Amanda.
Hey, I figured I would catch you off guard a little bit.
Thank you. You're awesome.
It looks like we have a question coming in, Brian. I'm not sure if you see that.
Yeah, I'm watching.
Oh, okay, not a question, more of a statement.
Another pat on the back. Thank you.
If you do have any questions for anyone, Brad did give you his contact information. Brian also has a wonderful podcast and a text message alert that you can join as well. I do enjoy being a part of that. So I do encourage you, if you're not already connected to either Brad or Brian on LinkedIn, please be sure to do that. Always a lot of helpful information there. So we will actually close out today with a great session, another great session with Sherry Ireland, and that's going to actually begin in 2 minutes. So in just a moment, you'll be redirected to the lobby, and same thing you did to get into this session, you'll do to get into Sherry's. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our link tree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.